Hey guys, so this is going to be a lecture video on prohibition notes. This is specifically for the DBQ project for extra credit over Thanksgiving break, so it gives you an idea what the era was about so you can do the DBQ project. So we're going to open up the notes that you guys are going to cover later on in the year. And even though we're going to spend a lot more time on the notes during the year when we get to it, I'm going to go through the whole story of what prohibition was, what happened, and how it ended. Now, the way it starts off with the temperance movement that we already talked about when we went over the industrialization age, where there's a lot of people who looked at alcohol as the root of many other problems to society. And in the 1800s, they started pushing the government that we should get rid of alcohol. Their thinking was, if you get rid of alcohol, then you get rid of the problems of society, like people getting too drunk and wasting a lot of money, wasting a lot of time, beating on their family members because they got drunk and they were angry, and they just blamed it on alcohol instead of blaming it on the person. So ultimately, all that push of the temperance movement goes into the 1900s, and they passed the 18th Amendment in 1918. So this is right after World War I is done, and they got the amendment passed. So now the consumption, which is to drink it, manufacture to make it, selling it, bringing it in or sending it out of alcohol is prohibited by the 18th Amendment and the U.S. Constitution. So again, that means they made an amendment to the Constitution, which, as we talked about, is a very difficult thing to do. That means there was a lot of support for it. Reformers, people who want change, considered alcohol to be the source of corruption. That many of the evils of society, like as I mentioned, wasting money, child or spousal abuse, unemployment, not wanting to work for the economy because they didn't want to work, they wanted to be lazy. Then worker safety, people did go to work, but they weren't too drunk. And they believed, you know what? There's an easy solution. You get rid of alcohol, society improves. So the end of the progressive movement, this is going to be the end of the progressive movement. This is one of the last major changes that they do. This is an era of change, and during this era of change, one of the last things that they got done was going to be this, that the prohibition will be passed, and now alcohol will be illegal. But the big question now is, how do you get people to stop drinking? Because they still want to drink, but the law now says you can't. So they passed the Volstead Act. The Volstead Act was a law passed by Congress that basically set up that alcohol was illegal, and then we're going to choose a new enforcement group to make sure people don't drink. Like basically, they're going to create a new federal agency. A federal agency is going to be like the FBI that we have today. The Federal Bureau of Investigation is going to be like the one that investigates crime across the country. So they're going to create the Prohibition Bureau. All right, so the Justice Department is going to be given money, or the Treasury Department gets given money and power, and they create the Prohibition Bureau. And their job is to, across the country, make sure people don't drink. But they're going to fail. Why? Because it was underfunded. Not enough money for this massive agency. If you got to stop people from drinking across the country, that's going to take a huge agency, which means there's a huge amount of money, and they just didn't give them money. They didn't have enough agents. They did not have enough agents to be patrolling the streets and making sure people weren't drinking. And simply too much corruption. As we're going to talk about, corruption is going to be a big part of prohibition that's going to not make it work, and it's going to make the people being angry about not being able to drink is going to allow corruption to be even easier. So the opposition to the law, there were 3 oppositions to the law. A lot of people argued that alcohol is not the main reason for these problems. It's the people. That alcohol maybe pushes them to do it, but ultimately it's the people. How are you going to get people not to do these things? Plus, when they were trying to get the support from people to say, yes, we should get rid of alcohol, they promised that beer and wine would not be touched. As in, it would be illegal to drink alcohol, like tequila, like vodka, like rum, like gin, that kind of alcohol, not beer and wine. And then when Congress passed it, they banned it all. So that really, really upset people that beer and wine was part of it. And the biggest other thing is that people felt like it only applied to them, regular people. Rich and powerful people were still drinking. Right? There is plenty of stories where newspapers would report on Congress, who passed the law to get rid of it, having big ass parties, drinking all night. So how is Congress, who passed the law saying to get rid of alcohol, gonna tell people don't drink when they themselves having parties, illegal parties, drinking alcohol? So that made people not really want to really pay attention to this law. So it was going to be even harder for anybody to tell them not to actually stop drinking. There were 4 major effects because now alcohol was illegal, and some of these effects they were not seen when they passed it. They thought, we get rid of all these problems, and what they did is brought other problems. Because, 1, criminals found a new source of income. If alcohol cannot be sold at bars anymore, if it can't be sold at the stores anymore, somebody's going to sell it because people still want to drink, and criminals thought, this is perfect. This is a way for us to make money. Two, organized crime is going to develop and grow. Organized crime like the mafia, because organized crime is going to look at this and say, selling alcohol is an industry that makes millions and millions of dollars every year, and now we're not going to sell it anymore? So mafia said, perfect, we'll sell it illegally, but we'll sell it. And now they're going to be making hundreds of millions of dollars instead of regular people who sold illegally before. Now the mafia will grow. Disrespect for the law is going to grow because people are going to see that the police don't do anything, and that police oftentimes were corrupt because people, like we're going to talk about Al Capone with the mafia, they realize that the more money we spread to the police to leave us alone to sell the illegal alcohol, the more money we make. So there's going to be so much corruption in police departments that people realized that, and they had no respect for the law. So that meant when they were drinking alcohol, they weren't afraid of the police. Fourth one, minorities will be heavily impacted with this because many minorities were in places where alcohol was legal, such as breweries and distilleries. They worked there, meaning that when they close the breweries, when they close the distilleries and the saloons, they're the ones who are going to lose a lot of these jobs. So it's going to hit them hard. And then there's high levels of discrimination as well, where oftentimes where they would raid, say, illegal bars, and a lot of people were drinking illegally, and it was a lot of the times minorities who were the only ones who got arrested, and they let white people go, good people, the good white people go. And it was the minorities, the ones who got arrested. All right, rise of organized crime. This is going to be one of the things that they did not see coming, as they thought, if we get rid of alcohol, we get rid of all these problems. Well, the problem is it didn't happen because people still kept drinking, and then they threw on a big, huge problem, which was that organized crime is going to grow, the mafia. Because when the mafia organizes, they organize just like a corporation. They have a leader at the top, they're the mafia boss, instead of like a CEO. They have the vice presidents under them, which is their capos. And then it's like a big criminal organization, and they ran it with violence. So that meant that there was going to be a lot of shooting. Plus, at this time, there's a new little machine gun that is going to be developed that is going to be perfect for organized crime. That's the Tommy gun. Little machine gun that could be held by one hand, and it just sprays bullets. So it's not about accuracy, it's about just spraying bullets. So when they were eliminating each other's mafia families to get more control over territory, they often would go where they're at, maybe eating dinner. Maybe they're coming out of a store and they just spray bullets. And if that means regular people behind them get hurt, well, that's what it is. So there's going to be a rise of speakeasies. These are underground or illegal saloons or bars and nightclubs that sold illegal alcohol. In places where there was a corruption, it was out in the open because police would be paid to just leave them alone. In places where maybe the police didn't take as much corruption, they would have to hide them in the back rooms. Sometimes there was a password that you needed to say or a knock that you needed to do in order to get to back illegal rooms. So it could be something simple if the police was really on it, or if the police was all bought out, like in Chicago, they would just have the big nightclubs with people drinking like it was legal completely without an issue. Oftentimes police and federal agents, the prohibition bureaus, would raid these factories where they make the alcohol. But because those people who ran the factories spent so much money into the police, often other policemen would call them and tell them, hey, they're on their way, get out. So the big bosses wouldn't get caught on these raids. Yeah, they would arrest all the people working for them, and they would seize all the alcohol, but the big bosses would escape. A couple of weeks later, they open up another warehouse with more workers, and they just start making alcohol all over again. Bribing was a huge part of this, because bribery by the speakeasy owners or the mafia just went everywhere. The one who did it the best was Al Capone. His nickname was Scarface. He's the one who's going to show how much money you can make with organized crime. He will laugh at police. It will be a joke how they passed this law to get rid of alcohol, and he's going to be making $60 million a year making alcohol. How? Because he's going to kill off competition, super violent. And again, if you got caught in the background of his violence, that sucks for you. And he bribed police, he bribed judges, he bribed politicians. Basically, he bribed everybody. His attitude is, I make so much money, and I want to keep on making so much money that I'm just going to spread the money around. In today's money, he was making almost $1 billion a year. 60 million back then is about $1 billion a year. So he was making almost $1 billion a year selling alcohol illegally, full of corruption. Now, an example of this corruption, his name is Big Bill Thompson. He was running for mayor, and when he ran for mayor, he told everybody, vote for me because I will not be pushed around by these gangsters. Vote for me because they're not going to trick me into anything. You vote for me and I will stop illegal drinking. He ended up being one of the most corrupt politicians in history. He, Al Capone, gave him so much money, and now he has the mayor in his back pocket. So how are they going to get Al Capone? It's going to take eventually a federal agency to go after him, not for illegal alcohol, not for all the killings that he was responsible for. They got him for not paying his taxes. And that's how they arrested and put Al Capone in jail. He actually went to Alcatraz, that very famous jail that's up in San Francisco. Bootleggers are people who smuggled in alcohol illegally from outside the country. You could either smuggle them in from Cuba, Canada, West Indies. It's on a boat. It's hidden on a truck. And you know how all those things that you hear stories of how they try to smuggle drugs in at the border? Those stories are all examples of where they learned from these bootleggers back in this era, except they weren't sneaking in drugs, they were sneaking in alcohol. Now, how does it end? Ultimately, Prohibition will lose support. In 1922, when Prohibition had first started, 80% of Americans were in favor of Prohibition, meaning 4 out of every 5 Americans said, yes, Prohibition is a good idea. And we're talking about years into it already. 10 years later, after all the violence, corruption, and all the freaking mafia and all that, only 20% of Americans now support it. So by 10 years later, they realize, what the hell did we do? Right? We got rid of it to get rid of all the problems of society, and those problems are still there because people still drink. They just drink illegally, and now we have all these new problems that have to do with the mafia and the violence and the corruption. So there's also something else that happens in the 1930s. That is the Great Depression. The Great Depression is going to be the worst economic period ever, and people suffered. Today, when people fall down financially, our government steps in and helps them. They help them with food stamps. They help them with money for other things that they need to. They help them money for rent. They help them with unemployment insurance. I mean, our government is set up so many ways to help people who fall down. But when the economy crashed in 1929, that led to the Great Depression, for those years, people were suffering, and they're looking at the government saying, help us, and the government had no money. So people start beginning a push. What if we make alcohol illegal again, and then we start taxing alcohol? Then we'll get a lot of money from legal alcohol, and we could use that money to give some people some food so they don't starve. So ultimately, by 1923, all this push led to the 21st Amendment, so they passed another amendment. This amendment got rid of rid of Prohibition, and alcohol was once again legal. So that's the information you're going to need to know in order to do the DBQ.